Claude responded, "My daughter told me she was flying to Denver to spend Thanksgiving with her biological mother while I was still holding the turkey I just pulled out of the O. My daughter told me she was flying to Denver to spend Thanksgiving with her biological mother while I was still holding the turkey I just pulled out of the oven. Kayla needs to know her real mom," my wife Susan said, not even looking up from her phone. "If that's a problem for you, maybe we should talk about what this marriage actually is." I set the roasting pan down on the stove. I didn't drop it. I didn't slam a single cabinet. I just stood there with oven mitts still on my hands while something in my chest went cold and still. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, a little after 5 in the evening, and the kitchen smelled like sage and butter in our house outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'd taken the afternoon off work to brine the bird the way Kayla liked it, extra garlic, the way she'd asked for every year since she was 9. There was a small gift bag sitting on the counter, a charm bracelet with a tiny painted horse on it, because Kayla had been begging for writing lessons since summer, and I wanted her to know I'd been listening. I was 58 years old, and I still bought birthday and holiday gifts like a man trying to prove something. Maybe I was. Susan sat at the kitchen island with both hands wrapped around a glass of white wine. "You already booked the flight?" I asked. "For 4 days over the actual holiday." Diane invited her. It's been 2 years since Kayla's seen her, and nobody thought to mention this to me before the tickets were bought. Susan's jaw tightened. "I knew you'd react like this." "Like what?" "Like a man who spent 13 years raising this girl might want to say in where she spends Thanksgiving." Susan looked toward the hallway where Kayla's door was shut, music playing faintly behind it. "That's exactly why she needs this. Some distance from all this tension." I waited for her to look at me. "Frank, she needs her mother," Susan said, quieter now, like she thought that would soften it. "I've never kept Diane away from her." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Her phone buzzed on the counter. I caught a glimpse of a name I didn't recognize before she turned the screen face down. Something in me went very still. "Is somebody else going to be at this reunion?" I asked. Susan's eyes narrowed. "That's not really your business." The way she said it told me more than any answer would have. I pulled the oven mitts off slowly and set them beside the stove. "Susan, listen to what you just told me. My stepdaughter is leaving for 4 days over Thanksgiving to see a woman who walked out on her when she was 6, and I'm the one who's supposed to feel like the problem here. You're making it sound ugly." "I'm just repeating what you said." She pushed her wine glass away from her. "Kayla wants one holiday with her real family, Frank. She's 17. She's got her own life starting soon. Real family." There was that word again, the one that had been quietly working its way under my skin for years, showing up in small comments I used to let go. I thought about the driveway where I'd taught Kayla to ride a bike, the one where she'd scraped both knees so badly I'd carried her inside crying while Susan was at a work dinner. I thought about sitting in the emergency room at St. Francis the night her appendix ruptured, holding her hand until 2 in the morning while Diane didn't answer her phone once. I thought about none of that counting as real in whatever accounting system Susan was running in her head. "Did Kayla ask me not to come?" I said. Susan glanced away. "Did she? She shouldn't have to choose sides just to spare your feelings. I never asked her to choose. You're doing that right now by cutting me out before the conversation even starts." Susan carried her glass to the sink. "You've been wonderful to her, nobody's saying otherwise." The word wonderful landed like a slap. A wonderful stepfather. A wonderful guy to call when the truck wouldn't start. "But you're not her father," she added, not cruelly, just factually, like she was reading it off a form. I looked down at the turkey cooling on the stove. "I've raised her since she was 4 years old, Susan. I know that. Do you?" "Because it doesn't sound like it right now." "Don't twist my words, Frank." I could feel the argument building behind my ribs. Every recital I'd driven to, every late-night fever I'd sat up through, every time I'd rearrange my whole week, because somebody in this house needed something from me. Instead of saying any of it, I asked, "Are you telling me to accept this, or are you telling me to leave?" Susan gave a tired little laugh that had no warmth in it at all. "It's 4 days, Frank. If you can't survive 4 days, maybe we need to think harder about what we're doing here. Is that a threat? I'm asking you not to make this harder than it needs to be." She sounded certain, dead certain, that I would fold the way I always had. I wrapped the turkey in foil, wiped down the counter, and walked upstairs with my jacket still on. Susan stayed in the kitchen, probably expecting me to come back down in 20 minutes and apologize for making the evening tense. I didn't go back down. In our bedroom, I opened the closet and looked up at the top shelf, where a lopsided ceramic mug sat gathering dust, glazed a crooked shade of blue, the words "World's Okayest Dad" painted across it in Kayla's 10-year-old handwriting. She'd made it in a pottery class and handed it to me grinning, saying, "I couldn't spell greatest, so you get okayest." I'd used that mug every single morning for 7 years. My laptop chimed on the dresser. An email from Marisol Vega, HR Director at Continental Freight's regional office in Lisbon, Portugal. Final offer. Director of European Logistics Operations. The company had come after me twice before with this exact posting. 3-year term, a real salary jump, relocation covered, oversight of 4 ports across the Iberian Peninsula. The first time, Kayla had just started middle school, and Susan said it would uproot her. The second time, Susan said long distance would kill the marriage. Now, Kayla was a senior, already filling out college applications, already halfway out the door on her own timeline, and Susan had just floated the idea of divorce because I'd flinched at being erased from a holiday. I called my older brother, Walt, who picked up on the third ring. "Everything all right?" he asked. "No." I told him what Susan had said. Then I told him about Lisbon. Walt listened without interrupting, which wasn't like him. Finally, he said, "Would you still want that job if Susan apologized to you tomorrow morning?" "I don't know." "Then don't answer tonight. I already turned it down twice, Walt. That's not the same as saying you should take it out of spite." "I'm not spiteful. Frank, you're calling your 62-year-old brother at 9 at night. You're something." I almost laughed despite myself. Then his voice softened. "Don't move 4,000 miles just to make somebody feel your absence. That's still letting them run the show." I barely slept that night. At 7 the next morning, I read the offer again, start to finish. Salary, housing stipend, start date. Then I pictured another holiday exactly like this one. Another year of being told I mattered right up until the moment my presence became inconvenient to somebody else's plans. I typed my reply and hit send before I let myself think about it any further. My hand actually shook afterward, not from excitement, but from the strange, hollow feeling of having made a decision nobody else had signed off on first. Susan left for the airport with Kayla 2 days later. Before she climbed into the rideshare, she asked me to make sure the sprinkler system got winterized because she'd forgotten to schedule it. "I'll take care of it," I said, and I meant the house, not the marriage. Kayla hugged me at the door, quick and a little stiff, the way teenagers hug when they're carrying something they haven't named yet. I didn't know then that Susan had told her I'd chosen to stay home because of a work deadline. "We'll talk when I get back," Susan said. Then the car pulled away down our street. I opened my flight confirmation on my phone. My plane to Lisbon left 3 days after Thanksgiving. Susan thought she'd come home to a husband waiting on the porch. She had no idea that by the time she landed, the man she expected to keep carrying everything would already be gone. Thanksgiving morning was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming from the living room. I turned on the Cowboys game without really watching it, ate turkey alone at the kitchen table with the volume up loud enough to make the house sound occupied. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. Susan had posted a photo to our family group text. Her, Kayla, and Diane standing in front of a fireplace at some rented cabin outside Denver, all 3 of them in matching flannel, Diane's arms slung around Kayla's shoulders like she'd never left. The caption read, "Finally together again." I stared at that sentence a long time. Kayla was smiling in the photo, but not with her eyes. Her shoulders were pulled up tight the way they got when she was uncomfortable and trying to hide it. I started typing, "Merry Thanksgiving, sweetheart, call me when you get a minute," then deleted it, word by word. Not to punish her. I just didn't trust my own voice yet. The next morning I called my attorney, a woman named Priya Nair, whom Walt had recommended years earlier for the business side of my consulting work. I explained the transfer, the ultimatum, the fact that I was leaving in 3 days. "You've already accepted?" she asked. "Yes." "And Susan doesn't know." "Not yet." A pause. "Frank, I'm going to say this plainly, because that's what you're paying me for. Protecting yourself is reasonable. Vanishing to scare her is a different thing entirely, and it can hurt you legally." "I'm leaving a letter, Priya. I'm not disappearing." "That's not quite as comforting as you think it sounds." I rubbed my forehead. "So what am I supposed to do? Sit here until she lands and let her talk me back into silence?" "No. But you need to understand what you can and can't touch before you go." By that afternoon, we had a plan. I redirected my next paycheck into an account in my name only. I left enough in the joint account to cover the mortgage, the utilities, and 2 months of groceries. I stopped the automatic payments on Susan's personal credit card and canceled 2 subscriptions that were mine alone. The least Acura she drove was under my name. I didn't report it or demand it back. I simply had the dealership reach out to her before the lease renewal came due. Then there was Kayla's tuition deposit for the spring semester. Already promised, already due in 3 weeks. That one made me sit back from the laptop for a long time. Don't cancel that out of anger, Priya said. I'm not angry at Kayla. You're angry at everybody right now, Frank, and that's fine, but let's not let it touch the one person who didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't wrong. I held off on any decision about the tuition until I could talk to Kayla myself. Packing took less time than I expected. 19 years in that house, and everything that actually mattered to me fit into 3 suitcases and 1 shipping crate. Clothes, my late father's toolbox, my passport, a handful of photographs from before my marriage. I left every stick of furniture we'd bought together. When I reached the top shelf of the closet, I took down the crooked blue mug. I sat on the edge of the bed holding it, and for the first time since accepting the job, I came close to crying. I opened Kayla's contact on my phone and hovered my thumb over the emergency contact setting. I couldn't bring myself to remove her. I was hurt, but I still wanted to be the one the hospital called if something ever happened. I wrote Susan a letter. 4 pages became 2, then 1. I stripped out every line that sounded like an accusation. I told her I'd accepted the Lisbon position and would be living there for at least 3 years. I told her I wanted a formal separation and that all financial matters should go through our attorneys from here forward. I wrote a second letter to Kayla and told her the truth, that I wasn't leaving because she wanted time with her mother. I was leaving because Susan had made it clear that my place in this family could be set aside whenever it stopped being convenient. I read it twice, folded it, and put it in my suitcase. I wasn't ready to send it, not until I knew what Kayla actually understood. On Thanksgiving evening, I picked up my mother from her assisted living apartment and took her to a diner near Broken Arrow because her building's kitchen had flooded that week. Eleanor ordered a patty melt and complained the coffee tasted like dishwater. "You're moving to Portugal," she said, stirring 3 sugars into her cup. "You'd better learn to complain about the food with more style than that." "I'll work on it." She reached into her purse and set a small velvet box on the table. Inside was my father's old railroad pocket watch. "He carried that for 30 years, she said. "I know you meant to give that to me eventually. I meant to give it to you when you needed it." I turned it over in my palm, the metal worn smooth. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I asked. "I think the life you were living was already over, whether you go or stay." "That's not what I asked. It's the answer you're getting." I laughed despite myself. Then she put her hand over mine. "Your father stayed places that treated him like furniture because he thought staying was the same thing as loving somebody. It isn't, Frank. Don't confuse the two the way he did." I left Tulsa 3 days after Thanksgiving. Nothing about the trip felt glamorous. My connection in Newark got delayed 2 hours. My suitcase ended up somewhere in Madrid, and I landed in Lisbon wearing the same wrinkled shirt I'd slept in on the plane. Marisol met me at baggage claim holding a printed sign with my name misspelled. "You look like you've been through something," she said. "Good morning to you too." That was the polite version. My temporary apartment was smaller than our old guest bathroom. The washing machine had 8 buttons, and none of them made sense. The next morning, I bought a carton of something that looked exactly like heavy cream and turned out to be a kind of yogurt drink I still can't pronounce. At the port office, a logistics coordinator named Teodoro watched me wrestle with the machine in the building's shared laundry room and said, "You crossed an ocean to be defeated by a washing machine." I almost smiled. Then Marisol called me into her office. The Lisbon operation had failed an internal quality audit 2 months prior. A major shipping client was threatening to pull their contract. "We have 90 days to fix it," she said, "or corporate may cancel this entire regional post." So I could be sent home. You could be sent home without your old position waiting for you. That evening, I walked back to my apartment through a light rain, my phone buzzing in my coat pocket. 19 missed calls from Susan. Her text changed tone as I scrolled. "Where are you? Why is your closet empty? What does this letter mean? You cannot just move to another continent without discussing this with me." When I finally answered, she was already shouting before I said a word. "Frank, come home." "No." "Kayla is devastated. She thinks you abandoned her. Put her on the phone. She's asleep. It's the middle of the afternoon there." Susan ignored that entirely. and told me the Denver trip had unraveled anyway. Diane had brought a man she called her business partner. Diane's card had been declined at dinner, and Susan had ended up covering most of the trip herself. "You need to help cover those charges," she said. "We're separated, Susan. My attorney can review whatever you send." "Are you really throwing away 13 years over one holiday?" I stood under an awning and watched rain run along the gutter. "Thanksgiving didn't create this problem," I said. "It just gave you a reason to say it out loud." That night, alone in the apartment, I almost called her back. Then an email arrived, clearly meant for someone else, forwarded to me by mistake. The attachment was titled Hartwell Household Net Worth Summary. It listed our house, my consulting income, my retirement accounts, my credit history, our total borrowing capacity. It had been created 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I'd been telling myself Susan made one selfish choice by booking that trip. That spreadsheet told me the choice had started weeks before she ever packed a bag. I called Walt immediately. "You're looking at it?" he asked. "I'm looking at it right now." "What do you see?" "Every asset we own, my retirement balance, my credit score." Walt let the silence sit for a second. "People build documents like that for a dozen reasons, Frank. Estate planning, divorce prep, sometimes something else." "What's something else?" "It looks like something you'd hand to a lender, not an estate lawyer." I stared at the columns again: income, equity, borrowing capacity, life insurance. It stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like somebody had priced out my entire life. "I did a little digging this morning," Walt said. "What kind of digging?" "Diane's boyfriend registered a company 4 months ago. Something called Highland Trail Adventures. Guided outdoor retreats, glamping sites, that sort of thing. Does he actually have one built? Not yet. He's filed 2 LLCs before this one. Both dissolved within a year. No bankruptcy, but there's an unpaid state tax lien and a contractor who sued him over an unfinished deck." I leaned back in my chair. "So he's not exactly a criminal mastermind." "No," Walt said. "He's something a lot more common, a guy who's always one great idea away from finally making it." I called Kayla the next evening. She answered on the second ring, her dorm-decorated bedroom visible behind her, laundry piled on a chair, a half-eaten bowl of cereal on her desk. Neither of us spoke for a second. "You actually moved?" she finally said. "I did. To Portugal. That's insane." "It is a little insane." She shook her head. "Mom said you were just staying home for work." "I wasn't. I know that now." "How do you know?" She looked down at her hands. "The cabin. It was a disaster, Frank." She almost never called me Frank. It slipped out and neither of us corrected it. Diane's boyfriend, whose name was apparently Kip, had spent most of the first night showing everyone slides on his laptop, revenue projections, retreat packages, expansion timelines. "Mom kept saying we were there to reconnect," Kayla said. "But nobody talked about me the whole trip." "They talked about money." My stomach tightened. "What kind of money?" She hesitated. "I wasn't supposed to hear this." "What did you hear?" She swallowed hard. Kip said, "Frank's got the credit. You've got the relationship. If you can get him to believe in the business, we're set." The room felt smaller suddenly. "What did your mother say to that?" "I don't know." I walked out of the room. "You don't know?" I couldn't just sit there. She rubbed at her eyes. Then later I saw her laptop open on the kitchen counter. It had your retirement account on it, your salary, our house. "You weren't snooping?" "I was looking for the Wi-Fi password." I asked her why she had all that information. "What did she say?" Kayla's voice went very small. She said, "Families share everything." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I suddenly understood how many times that exact sentence had been used on me whenever somebody wanted something I hadn't offered. "Except Thanksgiving," I said quietly. "I wanted my mom back," Kayla whispered. "The real one, not the check-in twice-a-year one." I thought maybe she'd changed. "That's not a stupid thing to want, Kayla. I feel stupid anyway." "Don't." I leaned closer to the screen. "Do you remember that mug you made me? The crooked blue one?" She laughed through what sounded like tears. "It's still ugly. I brought it with me. It's on my shelf right now." "You brought that thing to Portugal?" "I did." For the first time since Thanksgiving, something in my chest loosened. Not forgiveness yet. Something smaller and steadier. Hope. Susan called less than an hour later. "You talked to Kayla." "I did. You had no right dragging her into this." "I didn't drag her anywhere, Susan." "I know about Kip's company." Silence. I know about the spreadsheet. Longer silence. It isn't what you think. Then tell me what it is. She started fast. We were just organizing our finances. The document predates all of this. I do it every year. It included my credit score. Susan. We were being thorough. It was prepared for Kip's retreat business. No. Then why did he say I had the credit and you had the relationship? A sharp breath. You heard that? Kayla did. Her voice softened. Careful now. He was just thinking out loud. If things worked out. If the business worked out, what? She didn't answer. Was Thanksgiving ever about Kayla seeing her mother? I asked quietly. Or was it about warming me up to finance her boyfriend's glamping company? I wasn't going to force you into anything. You were going to ask? She said nothing, which was its own answer. Before hanging up, she said one sentence that stayed with me the rest of the night. I never stopped loving you, Frank. I answered honestly. I believe that. She sounded almost relieved. Then I added, but somewhere along the way you stopped respecting me, and I can't build anything on love alone. The next morning brought a different fight entirely. My first leadership meeting in Lisbon went badly. The American logistics team blaming the Portuguese dock workers, the dock workers blaming corporate for a software rollout nobody had tested locally. Nobody listened to anybody. Afterward, Marisol closed the conference room door. You know why they sent you specifically, she said, to fix the quality numbers? No. They sent you because nobody trusts anybody on either side anymore, and somebody needed to be the one who wasn't already part of the fight. That evening, I sat in my rental car in a parking garage for 10 full minutes trying to remember which level I'd parked on. I rested my head against the wheel. I almost called Susan. Instead, I called my mother. Rough one? Eleanor asked. The roughest yet? Thinking about coming home? Maybe. She was quiet a moment, then said, a boundary doesn't stop hurting just because you finally drew it, Frank. It just stops other people from deciding where it goes. A week later, Teodoro handed me a dusty binder from the port's records room. Nobody in this office reads the old reports, he grumbled. Inside were logs proving the software failures had started after an update pushed through from the American side months earlier. One the Portuguese team had flagged repeatedly, and nobody upstairs had acted on. For the first time since arriving, I understood the port wasn't failing because either side was incompetent. It was failing because nobody believed the other side had anything worth listening to. The exact same rot that had been sitting in my marriage for years. That afternoon, another message came from Kayla, a photo of a printed agreement she'd found in her mother's home office, unsigned but unmistakable, outlining that if the house was sold after a divorce, Susan intended to put part of her share directly into Kip's retreat company. I stared at that screen a long time. The betrayal wasn't really in the money. It was in how far ahead it had all been planned. Continental Freight's regional leadership conference would bring me back to Tulsa in February. Priya had already scheduled a formal mediation. Susan assumed I was flying home because Lisbon hadn't worked out. She had no idea I was bringing the spreadsheet with me, and the one witness who finally understood what that Thanksgiving trip had really been about. I hadn't set foot in Tulsa in almost 10 weeks. The airport looked exactly the same. I didn't. Lisbon hadn't fixed my life the way I'd half hoped it might. If anything, I'd aged into it, thinner, sleeping worse, still bracing every morning for the audit that could send me home for good. Susan texted before my plane had even reached the gate. Can we talk before tomorrow, please? I agreed to dinner at the steakhouse where we'd celebrated our 12th anniversary. Walking through those doors felt strange and familiar at once. Same dark wood, same smell of seared beef, same piano player in the corner. Susan was already seated, hair freshly done, wearing the sapphire earrings I'd given her years ago. For one unguarded second, I remembered exactly why I'd fallen for her in the first place. Then she smiled like the last 10 weeks had simply been an unfortunate misunderstanding. You look tired, she said. So do you, she gave a small laugh. Guess neither of us has been sleeping. The waiter poured water and left us alone. Susan folded her hands. I've had a lot of time to think. So have I. I think we both made choices out of hurt. My choice came after yours. She sighed. Do we really need to keep score, Frank? No. So let's stop, then come home. Just like that, as though Lisbon had been a long work trip instead of the largest decision of my adult life. She reached across the table for my hand. I didn't move mine to meet it. What about Kip? I asked. Her face tightened. That was a mistake. All of it. The trip, him, the business, everything. She looked genuinely worn down. I want to believe people can change. I do believe that, I said. But change has to happen before somebody asks for another chance, Susan, not after they get caught. The hope drained out of her face. You're punishing me. I'm protecting myself. Those aren't the same thing. She lowered her eyes. I never actually thought you'd leave. I know. That was the sentence that stayed with me longest. Not because she doubted our love, but because she'd counted on my staying no matter how little was left holding it up. The next morning we met in Priya's downtown office, windows overlooking the Arkansas River. Susan arrived with her own attorney. Kayla came alone. A few minutes later, Kip walked in carrying a leather folder, wearing a suit that looked slightly too expensive for him, smiling like a man arriving to close a deal rather than end one. Morning, everybody, Priya stood. Mr. Danforth. They shook hands. As Kip sat, Priya glanced at his sleeve. You've still got the price tag on that jacket. He looked down, embarrassed, and tore it loose. Nobody laughed, though I nearly did. Priya began. We're here to formalize the separation of Frank and Susan Hartwell. What followed happened far more calmly than I'd braced for. No shouting, just documents laid out one after another. The net worth summary, dated 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Then Kip's business pitch deck. My income listed twice under a section labeled Potential Financial Backing. Then an email chain discussing possible financing terms. Finally, the draft agreement Kayla had photographed. Susan looked overwhelmed. It wasn't finalized, she said. No, Priya agreed, but you were considering it. She didn't answer. Kip finally spoke up. Look, everybody's blowing this way out of proportion. Priya looked at him evenly. Were you expecting Susan's ex-husband to help guarantee your financing? I expected her to ask him. So you did expect it. Kip shifted in his seat. Susan turned on him. You told me we could rebuild something. I said maybe. You said we'd have a real chance. I said we'd see. She stared at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. You never meant any of it, he shrugged. I was keeping an open mind. That single sentence seemed to hollow something out of her right there at the table. 13 years of marriage, thrown open for a man who'd never actually promised her anything solid. Kayla stood before anyone else could speak. I'm done, she said. Nobody interrupted. She looked at Kip first. You only ever showed up when you needed something from somebody. He opened his mouth. She raised one hand. No. You weren't trying to be my father again. You were trying to be funded. Then she turned to her mother. And you kept saying all of this was for me. It was. It wasn't, Mom. It was never about me. Susan's eyes filled. Honey, you wanted your old life back, and you used me because saying that out loud would have sounded selfish. Tears slid down Susan's face. Kayla looked at me. I'm sorry. I believed her. I should have asked more questions. I love you, I said quietly. That's not going anywhere. She started crying harder, and I told her we'd rebuild what we needed to, slowly, at whatever pace she needed. Once the emotions settled, the attorneys returned to practical matters. I surprised the room. I don't want revenge, I said. Susan looked up, cautious. I want fairness. The proposal was simple. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split according to law after legitimate expenses. Neither of us would hide assets from the other. Susan would remain solely responsible for any debts tied to Kip's retreat company, since she'd authorized those discussions alone. I would keep covering Kayla's education, but tuition would go directly to the university, never routed through Susan again. Kayla agreed instantly. Susan looked almost confused. You're not trying to ruin me? If I wanted that, I said, I'd have done it weeks ago. Priya slid the agreement across the table. Nobody celebrated. There was nothing worth celebrating, only consequences finally landing where they belonged. As the meeting broke up, Kip quietly asked Priya whether the building validated parking. She smiled politely. After this morning, I think the walk will do you good. Even I nearly laughed. That evening, I attended Continental Freight's regional leadership dinner at a downtown hotel. Susan had been invited months earlier and still came, likely assuming I was there to announce my return to Tulsa. Instead, Marisol stood at the podium. When Frank arrived in Lisbon, she began. He inherited an operation where two teams had completely stopped trusting each other. She wasn't only talking about the port. He listened before he made a single change. He admitted where our side had failed instead of hunting for someone else to blame. She found me in the crowd. Because of that, our largest shipping client renewed their contract, and our Lisbon office remains fully staffed. Applause moved through the room. Then came the announcement. I'd been officially named Permanent Director of European Logistics Operations. The work wasn't finished, neither was I, but I'd earned the chance to keep building something that mattered. Afterward, Susan caught me near the exit. You're really not coming home. No. You're choosing strangers over your own family. I looked at her a long moment. No. I'm choosing a life where being dependable doesn't mean being disposable. Her eyes filled again. I honestly thought you'd always just be there. So did I. She reached for my hand. I stepped back, not in anger, just enough to protect the space between us. I loved you, Susan. I probably still will, in some quiet way, for a long time. Hope flickered in her face for a second. But love isn't enough when respect keeps disappearing. She lowered her hand. For the first time since Thanksgiving, neither of us argued. There was nothing left worth defending. People imagine divorce as one dramatic day in a courtroom. Ours unfolded over 5 slow months instead. Appraisals, paperwork, long stretches where nothing seemed to move at all. The house finally sold in early spring for less than Susan had hoped. An inspection turned up foundation issues we'd both ignored for years, and the market had cooled just enough to shave the price down. After the mortgage, repairs, and legal fees, neither of us walked away feeling wealthy. I got my share. She got hers. No hidden accounts, no courtroom fireworks, just 2 people quietly dividing up 19 years. Walt called after everything was final. Congratulations, he said. Doesn't feel like something to celebrate. It isn't really. That's why I said congratulations, not celebrate. You made it through without turning into someone you'd be ashamed to run into. I sat with that for a while after we hung up. He was right. There'd been moments, especially those first cold weeks in Lisbon, when revenge would have felt a lot more satisfying than dignity. I'm grateful, looking back, that I never reached for it. Susan used most of her settlement paying off debts tied to Kip's failed retreat venture. I didn't take any pleasure in hearing that. I also didn't rescue her from it. That turned out to be the hardest lesson of all. Helping somebody and enabling somebody aren't the same act, no matter how similar they feel in the moment. I'd confused the two for years. As for Kip, he faded out almost as fast as he'd shown up, once it was clear there'd be no investment, no loan, no access to my retirement funds. One afternoon in late summer, Kayla sent me a local news clip, a segment covering the grand opening of Kip's newest venture, a mobile glamping trailer service whose flagship unit had rolled backward down a gravel slope and landed nose first in a decorative koi pond minutes before the ribbon cutting. Kayla's only caption read, "His business really went downhill." I laughed hard enough to nearly choke on my coffee, then texted back, "Let's not make a habit of laughing at other people's disasters. Once is probably enough." She sent back a laughing emoji anyway. It wasn't really about Kip. It was 2 people finally sharing something small and ordinary again. Susan and I spoke only when necessary after that, mostly email. Occasionally a call about the house paperwork. Then about 7 months after the divorce was final, a handwritten envelope showed up in my mailbox in Lisbon, return address Tulsa. I made coffee before I let myself open it. The younger version of me would have torn it open standing in the doorway. Her handwriting looked exactly the same. She apologized, and not in the vague way people apologize for consequences instead of choices. She named things specifically. She admitted she'd mistaken my patience for something bottomless. She admitted she'd used Kayla as cover because admitting she just missed her old life would have sounded selfish out loud. One line stayed with me longest. "I stopped noticing everything you carried because you always carried it without complaining." I read the letter twice, then wrote back 1 page. I thanked her for the honesty. I told her I hoped she found real peace, and I told her something I could never quite manage to say while we were still married. I forgive what happened. I can't go back to it. That was the last letter between us for a long while, and somehow that silence felt healthy instead of hollow. Life in Lisbon slowly stopped feeling foreign and started just feeling like life. I found the bakery with the best pastel de nata before work. I stopped getting turned around on the tram. I even finally beat the washing machine. Teodoro insisted that made me half Portuguese by now. Working alongside him turned into one of the real gifts of this whole upheaval. On Friday evenings, we started spending an hour in a community woodshop restoring old furniture. My first project was a small side table with one leg noticeably shorter than the rest. "It wobbles," I said. Teodoro studied it. "It has character." I think it has a problem. Both things can be true. The second piece came out better. A walnut keepsake box I mailed to Kayla for her 19th birthday. A week later, she called. You made this? I did. It looks actually professional. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. She went quiet for a second. I use it every day. Our calls turned regular after that. Sunday evenings for me, Sunday mornings for her. She landed a part-time job shelving books at her university library. Started covering her own textbooks. Stopped calling me to solve every small crisis on her own. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We just stopped letting it run every conversation. The following summer, she flew out to visit. Watching her come through the arrivals gate nearly undid me. Older, steadier, more herself than I'd seen her in years. She hugged me hard enough that I nearly lost my footing. I missed you. I missed you too, kid. A few nights later, I had Teodoro and Marisol over for dinner. Halfway through the meal, Marisol asked Kayla how she and I had first met. Kayla didn't hesitate. He's my dad. The room blurred for a second. I looked down at my plate until my eyes cleared. Later, walking along the river after everyone had gone home, I told her she never owed me that word. I know, she said. So why now? She slipped her arm through mine. Because I'm finally old enough to see who actually showed up. Neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. The following Thanksgiving looked nothing like the one that had changed everything. My mother flew out to Lisbon carrying enough snacks in her suitcase to feed a small army. And within an hour of landing, she'd already complained the coffee cups were too small, the elevator too narrow, and the sidewalks entirely too full of themselves. The bread's excellent, though, she admitted. I suppose I'll forgive the whole country for that. On Thanksgiving morning, I stood in my kitchen making coffee. 3 mugs on the counter. Mine, my mother's, and the crooked blue one waiting beside my laptop for Kayla to join us by video. A year earlier, I'd stood alone in that Tulsa kitchen wondering exactly where I fit in my own family. Now 3 cups of coffee sat cooling while I waited for the call to connect. Kayla held up the walnut box on screen. It's getting full. Full of what? Good memories, mostly. A little later, one more message came in. Susan, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for everything you gave Kayla all these years. No requests attached to it, no guilt folded in, just a plain wish. I answered, Happy Thanksgiving to you too. I hope you find your peace. That felt like enough. Looking back now, people sometimes ask if moving to Lisbon was my way of getting even. It wasn't. Neither was the divorce. Neither was watching Kip's glamping trailer end up in somebody's koi pond. The real turning point happened earlier than any of that. The moment I finally stopped believing love required me to swallow my own disrespect just to keep the peace. Walking away didn't erase what it cost me. It just finally gave the wound room to close. If you've ever had to leave a place or a person just to hold on to your own self-respect, I want you to know you're not the only one who stood exactly where I stood. Sometimes the hardest goodbye you'll ever say turns out to be the first honest step toward the life you actually deserved. Thank you for sitting with my story tonight, Claude responded. Being needed isn't the same as being respected, and love only stays healthy when both are in the room together. Being needed isn't the same as being respected, and love only stays healthy when both are in the room together. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting to be seen, it's quietly choosing yourself when no one else will. And often the family that truly stays isn't the one bound by blood, but the one that shows up again and again without ever being asked twice. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a genuine and positive life lesson with you.